for quite some time now, I've been really fascinated um, by woke culture and woke and cancel culture, and I've been listening a great deal to a um, brilliant academic and courageous man from the land of my birth, Gad Saad, and I just love. I get so much. I got so much energy listening to him and so many ideas, reading his stuff and the way he sort of devastates these people. And he's been harping for a while on the Supreme Court Justice candidate who was asked during the Senate hearings if she could define a woman, and of course she said she could not because she's not a biologist. So sadly, God's family a couple of years ago lost their Belgian Shepherd, and they're looking around for a new Belgian Shepherd, and they ended up coming home with a giraffe because they're not biologists. They thought they were given a German Shepherd. As he said, one had two eyes, four legs. They assumed it was a German Shepherd, so they come home and realize that they brought a giraffe home. So that's woke culture is amazing. So I've been reading on this malady, and I stumbled upon Jordan Peterson, whom I think God also interacts with quite a bit, and something stuck up to me when he, in very simple terms, defined wokeism and cancel culture as a malignancy, he called it, a form of antisocial disorder masquerading as virtue. And I'm not a psychologist, but I study political psychology. So I see a lot of parallels to political psychology, the way psychologists talk about this malady. And in the series of arguments he makes, Jordan Peterson, he suggests that our reputation is arguably the most valuable commodity or product or stock that we have or that we possess as human beings. And he notes that everything in our lives rides on our reputation, our jobs, our status, family, personal relations, our future. And so it is this reputation that the wokeists, whom he calls narcissists, Machiavellians, psychopaths, it is this reputation that they try to game, he says, and they use something he defines as reputation derogation, a practice whereby they fluff up their own reputation and muddy the reputation of others. Narcissists, basically, right? And I think what he says is that narcissists are those who, those folks who have the confidence of the competence or the confidence of the competent, but do not have the competence of the competent. And so they overclaim their worth, they fluff up their image and their contributions, of which they have none, so that they divert from their own inadequacies. So essentially what narcissists do is assert that, and I have a family member like that, a very close blood relation. So a narcissist would go on to assert that everything that goes wrong in their lives is always somebody else's fault, whereas all that goes right in the world is always their spawn, their doing, their benevolent contribution. And so they ostentatiously trot out or virtue signal their altruism while denigrating anyone who dares challenge these unearned conceits. And one way of elevating one's reputation in that sense is to fluff up and flash out one's so-called moral virtue, which is essentially what the woke movement does. Histrionics of empathy for others or ostentatious solidarity and sympathy. This is, for the woke, a moral virtue, a way of tooting their own horn in an attempt to claim a reputational status without having to do the hard work for it, without truly laboring to be a genuinely good person. Being good takes a lot of effort, a lot of work over a lifetime. One has to be productive, nice, kind, generous, accommodating, understanding, conciliatory, etc. All of these, real virtues in order to earn the reputation of a good person. And all of this is onerous. It takes a long time to work on, to hone. It requires a lifelong of genuine effort, commitment, a life's work. It doesn't, just land on you from the heavens. Conversely, if you bombastically toot your own horn, make an unwarranted moral claim, trot out your own compassion, advertise your compassion, you don't really have, there's no merit because you're actually a sociopath. You don't have compassion, but you're instantly an angel because that's what you advertise. And you become an angel in the eyes of outsiders. You arrogate yourself the authority and moral high ground to denigrate and derogate and slander and demonize others, who become snakes, who do not measure up to your otherwise unearned virtue. And where does one dig for the founding elements of this right way of thinking, this righteous beatific virtue signaling? Where else than the New York Times when it comes to the woke, America's journal of record? As French-Canadian sociologist Mathieu Bocoté called it, the Pravda of our times. He says of the New York Times, it is the journal of those on a quest for the right way of thinking, the correct ideological line of Western progressive ideologues. It is your best ally in that case. Why? Because the New York Times delineates for you what to think, what you're forbidden to think, what you can say, what you shouldn't say. It is in sum a newspaper one ought to read as contemporary archival documents in real time in order to discover and learn what nonsense obsolete geriatric intellectual elites in their twilight are sputtering as they're getting extinguished, end quote. Now, high on the New York Times list of prized topics is, of course, righteous wokeism, with what it entails in terms of derogation of white heterosexual Christian Western culture, the dismissal of the anxieties of the old civilization vis-a-vis of a rising dominant Islamist ideologies, what the French have termed the grand remplacement, the great replacement, literally. And so central to this New York Times distortion and denigration of those anxieties is their laughable miscomprehension, I would say their malicious distortion of the concept of grand remplacement, or the theory of grand remplacement, the great replacement. The New York Times malignancy defined grand remplacement earlier this year as, and I quote, a racist conspiracy theory that white Christian populations are being intentionally replaced by non-white immigrants, end quote. Now, agree or disagree with the phrase grand remplacement, great replacement, and the person who coined it, French novelist Renaud Camus. In his French language definition of grand remplacement, Renaud Camus does not use the word intentional. He does not, the word intentional does not exist in his theory of grand remplacement. Indeed, what Camus talks about is a slow developing phenomenon, very slow moving over decades, in places even longer, in other places faster pace, but a progressive mass movement of populations and the replacement of one population by another under the weight of massive uncontrolled immigration. That 67% of Frenchmen, almost 70% of Frenchmen, for instance, express anxiety about fast demographic mutations in their country under the weight of uncontrolled immigration is valid. It may also be mal placé, sanctimonious on the part of the New York Times to bristle. I mean, who are they? It certainly is malicious and unjournalistic and intellectually dishonest when you're given a definition of a concept to slip in a term of your own and intentionally in this case into the translation of an original text where the word intentionally is lacking. I mean, this is almost criminal, but that's the New York Times. And what irks the New York Times is that this supposedly white supremacist conspiracy theory is bleeding into France's centrist mainstream. That former presidential candidate Valérie Pécresse, for instance, dared use the phrase grand remplacement in a campaign speech, and they say that she punctuated it. She punctuated the term grand remplacement with coded attacks against immigrants and Muslims. Again, a malicious translation by the New York Times of Valérie Pécresse's speech. Malicious was also the New York Times' claim that the French terms français de cœur and français de papier, which literally translate into French in one's heart versus being legally French or French on paper, those are expressions that were used by Pécresse, and I'm not defending her, okay? I'm not a big fan, but they said those were expressions that the extreme right in France uses. That is patently false. The extreme right may use the term français de souche, that is to say French through ancestral filiation, French by blood, if you will, ethnically French, versus français de papier, which is French on paper, or paper French, or français de cœur, actually, is a gentle, innocuous term. It's not anti-immigrant. It is not racist at all. Indeed, one can be, and many non-French citizens, francophones and francophiles, consider themselves français de cœur, consider themselves French in their heart and by heart, even though they may not be French citizens. Again, New York Times malignancy or flimsy grasp of French culture and French language. They're not mutually exclusive. In any case, so basically what the New York Times is proposing for historical cultures that wish to remain sovereign on their historic land and maintain the community of beliefs and values and cultures, etc., and maintain their staying power in their indigenous culture, the New York Times is suggesting that they suck it up and zip it up. What they base their sanctimony on is America's extreme right fringe and fears of America's extreme right, what they call white genocide, pilfering elements of Camus' Grand Remplacement, even though Grand Remplacement is not about a so-called white genocide. But who needs fact when you can read the New York Times? There are real sociopolitical, economic, and cultural disruptions caused by this unregulated mass immigration that local populations have the right to be genuinely concerned about. But those don't matter to the New York Times because white is evil by definition. Indigenous Frenchmen are white and have the right to pipe down and sit down. And a dozen white supremacist extremists in America hijacking the public space of the Grand Remplacement debate mean that the legitimacy of the Grand Remplacement anxieties in France are forfeit. Lovely. Have a nice day.